Hello everybody and welcome to this month's DIY. We're going to be taking a used book that can be repurposed and turning it into a attractive looking book pumpkin that can be displayed this season and in future falls and Halloween seasons. So first you have to choose a book that you want or feel comfortable repurposing. In other words, its useful life as a book has come to an end. The bigger book you use, the more work you're going to create for yourself. Some people really like to use mass market paperbacks because they're so cheap and they're really a perfect size. If you find a really thick one, that makes a really great pumpkin, but it's a lot more work. If you're lucky, you can find a nice small hardback that can be repurposed, and the fewer the pages, the less effort is required on your part to turn it into a pumpkin. In my exercise, I'll be demonstrating with one that's about the middle of those two. It's neither super thick or really small. So with my book, one of the first things we want to do is remove the book cover. And to do that, to remove a hardback book cover, you can open the book up and you'll want to make a cut along this seam here in the front and in the back. I find it's really helpful to use an X-Acto knife, but if you're careful, you can also use a pair of scissors. Again, please remember that because we are handling really sharp objects, this is not a craft that's really suitable for younger children and even adults and really experienced craft people that are used to using X-Acto knives, razor blades, scissors. It doesn't matter. You have to be really, really careful. One can cut themselves really easily with these tools, so just be careful, especially when you're cutting the book cover off. I've seen people grab the book with their fingers on this side and then they proceed to cut this way, not realizing that the blade is going to puncture through this part, and voila, you've just cut your finger. And with an X-Acto knife, that can be a really deep cut. So use a work surface that you're not afraid to damage or cut on. A wooden cutting board is great. In my case, I'm using this plastic mat. That's fine. Or a workspace in the garage. Just know that, just be careful with what you're working on and take your time so that you don't actually cut your fingers. So on my book, I'm going to cut from here on each side, and then it's going to look something like this. I've already done it. So I've opened up my book, and the book separates nicely from the book cover. And before you throw the book cover away, know there's lots of different crafts that you can use to repurpose these covers. Feel free to send me an email or contact me at the library and I can give you the instructions of a craft we did a few months ago where I made a book bag out of a book cover. You take the cover and you can line it with canvas or some other fabric, and you can install a handle, and you've got a neat looking book bag made from a book cover. But we can go over that again in another day. I just wanted to warn you that if you're afraid of throwing this away, there are definitely things you can use to repurpose them. But we have our book, and now what we want to do is turn this rectangle into a nice pumpkin shape. There's a few different ways you can do that. We can take a pencil and just freehand a circular shape right here on the book cover. If your circles are like mine and they don't really look like circles, you can sort of cheat by taking a paper plate just to guarantee yourself a rounded edge on the top and the sides. So I could take my pencil and draw here, another rounded edge on the side, and another rounded edge on the bottom. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, the purpose is just to give yourself a nice rounded edge. And I'll show you that again in the marker in just a moment. You do not need to do anything with the spine, meaning the bound part on the side. That's going to remain square or straight. So if I demonstrate that one more time with a marker, you can see I'm going to put a nice rounded edge here. Here, notice I'm not going all the way. I'm doing that on purpose. And here. So I know my top, my bottom, and my side are round. And I just have to sort of match those up. There's no magical or perfect way to do this. And it's okay if you make a mistake. So I'm going to try to bring that. See, if I don't like that, then I just kind of match it up here. And I just have to tell myself that this is the eventual line that I want to cut on. If you want it flatter on the sides like a pumpkin might be, this is perfect. If you want a nice, more compressed, rounded shape, you just have to make your circle come in a little tighter, and you'll sacrifice more book, but it'll be rounder. So whatever you want or like. So if you visualize this rounded shape that you're going to make, it's going to look something like that. Now, what our goal is to take a pair of scissors or an X-Acto knife, and I'll show you both techniques. You can proceed to cut these corners off. And I'll demonstrate it a little bit with the scissors first. You can go 3 to 4 pages at a time, or whatever you feel comfortable with, but it's just physically impossible to cut through the whole book at once. Maybe if you have a bandsaw, you could try it, but patience and scissors, or patience and an X-Acto knife are all you need. So I'm just going to cut this, and eventually I'm going to do the same thing here and up here and a little bit on this corner, but I just go a few pages at a time, and I'm going to get plenty of paper scraps. And part of my goal is to eliminate this flat edge. So as I'm going, I want to trim off just a little bit on this edge as I go around. And I just keep doing that over and over and over again. With an X-Acto knife, the benefit is you can essentially trace the circle, and it cuts, be careful not to cut yourself, it cuts through 2 to 4 pages at a time. And notice how slow I'm going. I'm doing that on purpose. You need to go really slow. And after you've gone through, it comes out, and then you would just keep doing that over and over and over again. Around these edges, and the bottom edge. And the X-Acto knife is very useful when you're trying to get this rounded edge next to the spine. I actually found it helpful to give myself a little room and make a little notch up here. So instead of a circle coming back around this way, I kind of have this come back up to the top, and I'll do the same thing on the bottom. And that just gives it, I think, a little more character that looks like a pumpkin. And then with either scissors or your knife, you can cut here, here. Again, a little tiny piece came off. You're going to do this 3 or 4 pages at a time. Here, here, around, and down here. Oops. Sorry about the bump. Take your time. I can't say that enough. So that's off, and I just got to keep going. I'm going to keep doing that over and over and over again until my book looks something like this. So you can see my rounded edges here, and it's not perfect. Notice the profile. You can see that it's uneven, and that's okay. If you really want to do some extra trimming at this stage, you can take a pair of, say for example, you want to remove this part right here that's sticking out. You can take a pair of scissors and you can give your pages just a little trim. Notice not how much, but how little I just took off. And save these longer scraps. They're going to come in useful later on. So I just have to do that for as many times as I want until I'm comfortable with the shape and the texture. I really wanted to have a nice rounded edge up here on the top. It's fine for me to have this relatively flat bottom because eventually the pumpkin's going to stand up, which it does like right now. But notice this is not round. One of our next steps after we've cut these pages down is to space them so that we can make them into a circle that comes all the way around. Remove these scraps for now, but you'll notice that that just doesn't look right. We need a way to, these pages look great, but they're bunched too heavily right here. So I'll show you a trick to do that with not super glue, a hot glue gun. Again, it took a long time to cut this down, and it's going to take a long time for our next step, where every third or fourth page we take a hot glue gun and we apply a little tiny bead of hot glue on this inside seam. Count to 3, well, not count to 3, but 3 or 4 pages later, do it again. It's helpful with the text because I'm just going to draw a little line right on the inside. And I just keep doing that. Oops, my glue fell out. And I'm going to go ahead and keep doing that, and we'll check back in once I'm finished. So several minutes later, I'm still applying hot glue to every third or fourth page. I just put a narrow bead right along the seam, just like that. And the purpose of this is to help hold it together at the end, but also, more importantly, to space these pages to give it a more, that way when we turn it into a rounded object, it's got a more uniform, it's a little more uniform. It's not as spread out as it was before. So you can see where it's thickened right along there, where I've added just a tiny bit of glue along every third or fourth page. And then eventually, when you use the hot glue gun, it sort of creates this cobweb effect. Now I'm going to pull that apart. But now eventually when I put this together, the pages are going to be a little more uniform when I'm all done. My next step, before I join this half to this half, is I want to go ahead and paint this outer edge of my bright orange color. I'm going to do some supplemental painting after that, but I want to paint this. You can use any kind of craft paint. I've found that orange watercolors work really good because the paint actually bleeds into the page and it doesn't just stay on this outer edge. So that's going to be my next step. So the paint I'm using is just an orange colored liquid watercolor. But again, any paints can be used. Orange spray paint is also very practical and useful for this exercise, but I really like these orange watercolors. So with a bowl or a small plate and the brush that you're going to be using, I'm just going to apply some of this, and it's liquid, this orange watercolor paint. And I'm just going to start turning this outer edge as orange as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going all the way around. So after I've gone all the way around, you can see that I've missed some spots, and that's okay. But you'll notice when I open it up a little bit, that orange is really just on the outer edge. I want to be able to somehow get some orange on this inside part, just a little bit. One option would be to paint the entire page. You know, I suppose you could do that, and it would actually be it would look nice, but that's going to be really time consuming to do that to the front and back of every single page of your book. So one way of speeding up the process using the watercolors is to use some kind of a spray instrument. Again, this is why using spray paint is a useful medium. But if you don't want to use spray paint, you can still use the watercolor with this trick. I'm going to take a clean spray bottle and it might actually fit without having to. If you find a spray bottle that fits your watercolor bottle, you don't need to transfer it. You could just put on the spray attachment right on your bottle. In my case, that's not going to work. So I'm going to have to pour it in here. Because it's a watercolor, you could dilute it with more water to make your paint last a little longer. But I'm not going to dilute mine just because I want the color to be as brilliant or as bright as possible. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit before I proceed. While I'm letting that dry, I'm going to go ahead and take my stick that I found, and I'm going to glue it to the back of the spine, and then I'm going to join the two halves of the book together to create that rounded pumpkin look. The nice thing about hot glue is after you glue it, it dries or cures pretty quickly, so that stick is now on that book spine pretty comfortably. And I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And I want to glue these two ends. These two ends I want to glue together as much as possible. So I'm not just going to go here, but I'm going to apply some glue all around to get them to join together really well. So now after I've joined the two halves, we still have this semicircle where this side looks really great, but this side looks really sporadic. So what you have to start doing is joining some of the pages together near the top, just enough to kind of hold it together a little bit. Then you have to go back around the book and again every third or fourth page apply another bead of hot glue just to give it some more spacing, and when it's all done it's going to be a little better rounded all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, skipping the pages that I've already glued, but every third or fourth page I'm going to go ahead and add some more glue, and that will help fill this in a little bit. So as you keep going around, anytime you find some pages that are bunched up like this, go ahead and start applying a bead of glue along every page, and just keep doing that. Sometimes you'll find that you may need to do every page, other times every third or fourth is sufficient. And then as you go all the way around, that will start making the pumpkin a little more symmetrical, and making a nicer round shape. Obviously, when you're all said and done, there will be a definite front side of the pumpkin and a definite back side, but it will look a lot more rounded and prettier when it's all done. But we still have our original problem of the orange paint is just along this outer edge. So one way to get in between some of these pages is to use our spray bottle with the watercolor orange inside. And as long as you're on a, remember, use a nice good surface to work on, you can go ahead and spray the paint. And this preserves a little bit of the book feel, the whiteness of the page, but that orange gets applied a lot more neatly, and it just brings out the color a lot better. Try to use a spray pattern instead of a stream pattern. And you're not going to get every page perfect, and that's fine. And you're probably going to have to go around more than once. But do that until you're comfortable with the color. Like any craft, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Because you're all using watercolors, the water definitely starts to warp the pages. So use a little bit, let it dry. Use a little bit, let it dry. Don't try to overpower it with paint too fast, too soon. And then I'll show you what to do next to finish the pumpkin. So now we can see the stem of our pumpkin, and at some point we're happy with the coloration of it, but we want to accent or decorate around this top edge right here. A great or useful product to use for that are the scraps from the cutting we did earlier. I like to just get a bunch of the longer scraps and hot glue them. Figure out how you want them. A little bit goes a long way. I'm going to kind of wrap them like this, make a little twist, and I'm just going to hot glue on the front and again on the back. And one thing I like to do sometimes is get some green construction paper and just mix some real thin strips of green paper with our book scraps that we made earlier. A little bit of a twist. So this will be my front, and then I'm going to do the same thing back here. And then when that's dry, I can trim it down if I need to. But much like my scarecrow last month, I like to kind of have it really rough looking. So I'm going to do that real quick, and I'll show you what I come up with. And now we have our completed pumpkin. Again, you can make it up here as neat or as rough as you want it to look. If you don't want to use scraps of paper, you can get some green ribbon. That looks really well. You can also cut out some pumpkin plant shaped leaves and put that on the top. That makes it look really cool. But I kind of like this really rough, almost like a scarecrow, paper scraps at the top. It lets you repurpose some of those paper scraps, and they're hot glued on there. But this is it. This is the DIY book pumpkin. And once you're done, because it's rounded, it's semi-fragile, but if you're careful, you can box it up and reuse it from year to year.